In the fascinating world of ancient Rome, marriage looked very different from what we think of today. Back then, getting married wasn't really about love or spending your life with someone special. It was more like making a business deal or forming a powerful alliance between families. Surprisingly, it was totally normal, even expected for Roman husbands to be unfaithful. Affairs weren't hidden or shameful like they might be today. In fact, many men had casual flings with women known as or even long-term lovers outside of marriage, but that's not all. Roman men often had romantic or sexual relationships with other men too, and this was seen as a regular part of life. To truly understand how the Romans thought about love and desire, we have to let go of today's ideas about relationships and think from their point of view, where marriage, power, and pleasure were all deeply connected. In ancient Rome, people didn't label themselves the way we often do today as gay, straight, or bisexual. Instead, they cared more about who was in control during a relationship than who was involved in a typical man-woman relationship. The man was seen as the dominant one, the giver, while the woman was the receiver. This wasn't just about the relationship itself, it was also about showing who had the power. When two men were involved, things got more complicated. One of them had to take on the receiver role, which Romans thought of as more feminine and submissive. That position often carried a social stigma for adult men, but not always, especially if the younger partner was still a teenager. One well-known type of same-sex relationship was called pedestry. In this setup, an older man called the Arisers formed a bond with a teenage boy, known as the Eromenos. But it wasn't just about romance or intimacy. These relationships often included mentorship, guidance, and help with getting ahead in society. Back then, big age differences in these relationships weren't shocking like they would be today, especially among the wealthy and powerful. For the Roman elite, it was seen as a normal part of a young man's journey into adulthood, offering him important connections and a way into the world of politics and influence. Even among Rome's most powerful men, emperors, generals, and politicians, it was completely normal to have both male and female lovers. What's surprising is that this wasn't seen as cheating, at least not the way we think of it today. Back then, there were no birth control methods, and giving birth was one of the most dangerous things a woman could go through. So when a man had affairs outside of marriage, especially with other men, it was sometimes seen as a way to avoid putting his wife at risk, a kind of ancient birth control in a strange and practical sense in same-sex relationships. The person with more power, like an emperor, was usually expected to take the dominant masculine role. This showed off his strength and authority, but Roman society didn't always follow its own rules. Sometimes even the most powerful men didn't stick to these expectations. Believe it or not, Julius Caesar, one of the most famous leaders in Roman history, was said to enjoy being the more submissive partner in his same-sex relationships. This shocked many people at the time and left Romans gossiping and confused, because it didn't match the image of a strong, commanding ruler emperor. Hadrian was not like most Roman rulers. Although he was married to a woman mainly for political reasons, he seemed to have no real romantic interest in her. In fact, many historians believe they never even shared a physical relationship. This idea comes from the fact that both Rene and his wife had many lovers of their own, and Rene gave most of his attention to men. One young man in particular stood out, a beautiful and intelligent teenager named Antinous. Hadrian adored him. He made sure Antinous received an excellent education, and the two traveled together across the empire. But their close bond ended in tragedy. While they were in Egypt, Antonius mysteriously drowned in the Nile River. Heartbroken, Hadrian took extreme steps to honor him. He built an entire city near the place where Antinous died and named it after him. He even had Antinous' body mummified and brought back to Rome. Hadrian went as far as having coins made with Antinous' face and declared him a god, and something incredibly rare, worship of Antinous spread throughout the empire. Now, Hadrian wasn't the only emperor with unusual love stories. Emperor Nero also had romantic relationships with men, but his behavior shocked even the Romans. Most emperors chose their lovers from palace slaves and still treated them like servants. Nero, however, did something very different. He held full wedding ceremonies. In one case, he married a former slave named Pythagoras, but Nero played the role of the bride, wearing a veil and all, while Pythagoras was the groom. This confused the public because Nero, as emperor, was expected to take the dominant masculine role. Later, Nero married another young male slave named Sporus. This time, to please the Roman people, he took on the masculine role himself, showing how even emperors had to balance their personal desires with public expectations. However, some of Emperor Nero's actions would be deeply disturbing by today's standards. In one shocking case, to make sure the public saw him as the dominant masculine figure in his relationship with the boy Sporus, Nero had the boy castrated, a cruel act done purely for image and control. There are other examples of Nero being harsh or abusive toward his lovers, but it's hard to know exactly what's true. The most shocking claim about Emperor Nero is the ancient assertion that he committed incest with his mother Agrena the Younger. This allegation appears primarily in the works of the historian Suetonius. The lives of the Caesars, and more cautiously in Tacitus' annals, both suggest Agrena initiated the relationship to maintain control over Nero after he became emperor, while the incest allegation is a notorious part of Nero's dark legend. It is almost universally regarded by credible historians as a vicious fabrication. It represents a potent example of how political enemies in ancient Rome used sexual slander, the most shocking taboo, to destroy reputations posthumously. But while Nero's behavior was extreme, another emperor, Tiberius, is remembered even more darkly, especially for how he treated the young people around him. Tiberius is often described as one of the worst offenders when it came to abusing his power over his lovers. He had a strong interest in much younger boys, and the way he treated them has led many historians to call him one of the most sexually corrupt emperors in Roman history. Much of this happened far from the public eye. Tiberius spent many of his later years in luxury villas on islands in the Mediterranean, especially the island of Capri. He had boys brought there officially as servants, but many reports suggest they were also used to satisfy his sexual desires. Some of the stories about Tiberius are likely exaggerated. Roman historians often added shocking details to make their subjects look worse, but even if only part of it is true, it paints a disturbing picture of how absolute power could be abused in the Roman Empire.